Please be seated, and I invite any children who are present to come join me. So have you guys ever been afraid? What's something that you're afraid of? The dark. What's something else? Somebody else? What are you afraid of? Heights. From the spookies? From monsters, yeah. There's lots of things in the world to be afraid of. What do you do when you're afraid? You go to your mommy, yeah. You can run away. Yeah, that's another thing we can do. That's right. Sometimes the things that we're afraid of are things that we can run away from, right? We can just leave, and then the scary thing isn't there anymore. And sometimes we can't run away, but we can have somebody be with us, right? Like your mommy. Sometimes if we go and get somebody else, they can chase the scary thing away. Like this morning at the earlier service, one of the kids said that she was afraid of spiders. You know, and if that's the case, you know, usually mom or dad can get rid of the spider and the spider's gone. But sometimes they can't make the dark go away, right? If the lights go out because there's a storm, it's just going to be dark. You can have a flashlight or a candle. It can help. Sometimes you can't find the flashlight or the candle, right? It's just dark, yeah. But it's not so bad because your mommy's with you, right? So sometimes we can't make the scary things go away, but we can. Somebody's coming for a visit. We can't make the scary things go away, but we can be okay with it because we're not alone. That's what Jesus is talking about in our gospel this morning. He said, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe in me. What he's really saying when he says believe is remember, you're not alone. No matter how scary things might be sometimes, you are not alone. Not ever. If we can remember that, if we can remember that we're not alone, then we can even find it in ourselves to be there for other people when they're afraid. Because it can be more than just waiting for someone to be there for us, but we can find the strength to be there for other people. Yeah. Yeah. So, why don't we all go walk over to the lectern and pulpit and get some stamps? I think he's got my hand right now. Come on. Come with me. Hey, bud. You want to go back over here? Yeah. I know. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. I'm going to confess that I've been really wrestling with what to do with this gospel lesson this week. Because usually when I encounter it, it means that I'm burying somebody. It's probably the single most popular gospel lesson that Episcopalians pick for their funerals. And I've been trying to figure out how to preach not a funeral sermon this morning. If we had a body, I would know what to do. So as I've wrestled with it, I've thought about where it falls in John's gospel. And that's not helping me a whole lot either. In John's gospel, the words we've heard from Jesus this morning come right before his crucifixion and death. It's words that Jesus is offering to his apostles to prepare them for what will be the single greatest trauma in their lives up to that point. Watching their beloved teacher and friend tortured and killed. And it's Easter season now, and we've had weeks and weeks and weeks of Lent and Holy Week talking about the crucifixion and death, and I'd really prefer to be in the happy time of resurrection right now. And on top of that, in the civil calendar, it's Mother's Day. And no priest wants to be the Debbie Downer sermon on Mama's Day. But there it is. You know, when John wrote these words, he was writing to a community that was facing its own trauma. John's gospel was written at the end of the first century, in that really uncomfortable time when the Christian and Jewish communities were pulling apart from each other. And in fact, the scholars tell us that it's almost certain that John was writing to a community of Jewish Christians who had just been kicked out of the synagogue. If I were to take half of y'all and tell you you couldn't come back to St. Matthew's ever again, that's how John's community was feeling. Pretty traumatic. This is words spoken not for happy places, but for people in a time of need, in a time of pain, in a time of sorrow, in a time of trauma. And there are the words that we are given today. You know, even this day, this Mother's Day, isn't what we think of. You know, now it's take mom to brunch and buy her a bouquet of flowers. Even Mother's Day was born out of a time of trauma. The first Mother's Day was held in 1870, 5 years after the conclusion of the Civil War. It was called by Julia Ward Howe, the woman who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And its purpose was to speak to a nation that had just undergone the greatest of traumas. In the wake of that war, mothers were still grieving the sons who had not come home, or the sons who had come home maimed, or the sons who had come home in body but not in mind or spirit. And that first Mother's Day was not about being grateful for mom or for taking her to brunch or buying her a Hallmark card. It was about moms going on strike. The women of this nation saying, we will not ignore the trauma that has happened to us, and we will not be content to let it happen again. In that way, Julia Ward Howe and those other women on that first Mother's Day were living out what Jesus says to us. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. That is, commit to following where Jesus goes, even into that place of trauma. I'm sure if they could have, they would have loved to just forget all of the pain and suffering that had happened in their communities and in their nation, and they couldn't because the wounds were too present. If you want to have resurrection, you have to be willing to first go to the cross. Even the resurrected body of Jesus still shows the signs of trauma. Wounds in hands and feet and side. We live in a time of trauma. There are far more wars going on around the world right now than Julia Ward Howe could have ever imagined when she proclaimed that first Mother's Day. Our political system is still seemingly crumbling around us. The church is still trying to figure out how to do what we do in this modern age. Families are torn apart, and the culture is changing so rapidly that every morning when you wake up, it can be hard to figure out what is right and what is wrong and what we're supposed to do. It's for people in a time just like ours that Jesus spoke his words. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Now that's not magic. Just like when I was sitting and talking with the children, having the presence of God doesn't make the scary stuff go away. But we do find that we can face it. The musical, The King and I, has a song, "Whenever I feel afraid, I hold my head erect and whistle a happy tune so no one will suspect I'm afraid." There's not any sense of making the fear go away. It's simply saying, I will not live in the fear. I will live as the one who has the strength to face it. That's what Jesus is saying to us. The world always has been a frightening and traumatic place. And we can be consumed by the fear and the trauma, or we can choose instead to remember that God is still God, ever present with us. And that because of that, we have the strength to choose something other than the fear. We can choose to be people who love, who stand up, even when the world tries to push us down, who are ready to proclaim that the fear and the violence cannot have the last word. We might have to go to and through the cross, but resurrection always, always waits on the other side. That's how we can read the words we've read today in the midst of Easter. And on this day in which we celebrate motherhood and mourn the loss of mothers or children or lost opportunities Life is not a process where it's either trauma or resurrection. Rather, it's a place where we learn that God can take all that mess and transform it and show us a way through it, a way through that always has the choice of life.